So I said that our goal here was to have a sheet that we could actually ship out to Excel so somebody could fill it out physically on the floor. And I'm realizing as I'm talking about this, I don't know how many of you have ever done physical inventory, but it's kind of an interesting thing walking around and counting the numbers of things. I used to do a physical inventory for a company that's since been purchased by Target once a year as part of a fundraising for a nonprofit, and I got to count the plush, which would be the teddy bears. That's always fun, like to count hundreds of teddy bears in an evening, much more fun than candles. Here I am in data sheet view, and this is about what I want it to look like, but I am going to want to have more columns over here. You know, maybe I have items that are in different places, and we want to add how many of them are in store 1 and store 2 and store 3 and so on. But whether I'm in data sheet view or standard view, it truly doesn't matter. Both of these are going to let me throw this right over the wall to Microsoft Excel. So I'm going to just export this to Excel, and right away it says, do you want to open or save this? And this is a little bit of a clue to those of you who are my Excel power users. The fact that it's coming, it's an IQY file, means it's a query file, okay? So I'm going to just open this up. And the Excel security is telling you this, okay? There's a data connection going back to SharePoint. Is that okay with you? And you say yes, and here we are. Now, these two columns don't exist in our list. They're provided by SharePoint to create a connection back to Microsoft SharePoint. So this lets SharePoint is telling Excel where it's going to find this particular record and these particular items. If I want to, I can simply hide these columns in Excel right now, which is what I'd probably do. I right-click, select right-click, and hide them. And then, let's say we had items that were sitting in store 1, in store 2, in store 3, and total. So here I am in Excel working with the results of this query that I have sitting there in order to make a sheet that I can hand out to people to take out on the floor. That's a kind of cool thing. Okay. Questions about how we just sent this stuff out here to Excel, the contents of our list from SharePoint. I'm going to add a new item to this list now. Here I am back in SharePoint. So the SharePoint is going on, and we have so there's my new item. I've added it. Here I am in SharePoint. Let's go back to Excel. In Excel, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Data, refresh. Here we go. There's my new item. So by exporting this, I don't have to export it over and over and over again. I only have to export it once. And if somebody's sitting in Excel and wants to know, do I have the latest information, all they have to do is refresh it to get everything that's true from Microsoft Excel or in Microsoft Excel from SharePoint. So potpourri I added, here it is. I want to point out something else too here that's it's in front of us, but it's not obvious. This is a bit of a nuance, okay? I created a view here in SharePoint that only includes the title and the part number. But SharePoint still includes information, okay, about the quantities that were on hand last year. It sits right here. So the view that I create determines what comes out to Excel. If I export to Excel from this view, I'm not just going to get title and part number, I'm going to get quantity as well. So when I decide that I want to take a list out to Excel, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a view that looks exactly like what I want to see in Excel. Because if I do that, I'll put this on a new sheet in the same book. This one has quantities in stock in it, right there. Here's my first one, created with the view without quantities. Here's my second. So, create the view you want, export the list from Microsoft SharePoint to Microsoft Excel, and you've created a lasting connection that the user can simply refresh. Any data changes on either one of these sheets, it will be because somebody has changed it in SharePoint first. Here, for example, maybe we go in and we change the names of some of these things. We change the Spice Wax candle to the Super Spice Wax candle. And now we realize that there are 22 of those on hand. I come back to Excel. I don't have to do anything in SharePoint again. All I need to do is refresh this. And when I do, it's going to go back to the server. There are my 22 Super Spice Wax candles.
So, Jenny, Nikki has another question about the relationship. So when you went into Excel, you added some columns for Store 1, Store 2, and she's wondering about the relationship of those new columns that you put into Excel and how they're being stored in SharePoint.
They're not. That's a great question. These new columns are not being stored in SharePoint at all. If I wanted these columns in SharePoint, I'd add them in SharePoint. What I'm doing here is I have the ability on this first sheet I exported to do other calculations, to create a sheet that I print or sort in a different way. I can do any analysis on this I want, and I'm not changing what's going on in SharePoint. So if I want to modify my SharePoint site to include new columns, I would go back here to SharePoint to my inventory, okay, and create a column, and I might call that Store 1, for example, Store 2, and so on. And we'd have a number on hand, right? And I'd say that it's not required. The minimum would be 0. No decimal places. And let's just go ahead and add this. And this is how it would look here in SharePoint. Now, that's not going to affect either. Let me double check here. So I added it, and I'm showing it in the default view. And even still, it was never in that exported view at the time I created it, so it doesn't really come in here. This is what I typed. All right? No, I'm sorry. Let me say that again. This actually is the Store 1 that I just added, and I should have added something like Store 19 so we'd know it was different. But where this comes from, this query is actually going and running in SharePoint all items, and all items include Store 1. So it's tacking it on to the end. It's not in a pretty place, but it actually put it there.
So Jerry has a question. No, go ahead, Jenny.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Jerry just had a question about...
Yep, keep going, Ann.
Can you change the data in Excel and sync it back to SharePoint? If the column exists, you know, he's assuming that the column exists in SharePoint. Can you change it in Excel and sync it back to SharePoint?
So this is how this used to work, actually. It's a real interesting notion of what I'd really like to do is I'd like to have a spreadsheet that I synchronize up instead of synchronizing it down, okay?
Yep.
The problem with that is that where your one source of truth belongs is not on your laptop or mine. It's actually sitting on the server. So in terms of can I have my workbook that I synchronize up and modify the values that are sitting on the server? That's not what we want to be doing. There are ways we can do this, though. So if you think about it, let's take this inventory thing out to its conclusion. So the immediate answer is SharePoint is no longer designed to have the master copy sit on a user's computer and to synchronize from there up to SharePoint automatically. And I'll tell you another thing about that. It seemed like a really cool feature, but truly it broke frequently, and that's in a way because it was swimming against the tide all the time. So it wasn't great. I'm glad it's gone. That's the easiest thing I can say, because I'd rather you were updating the data that we wanted to update. But let's imagine all of these fields exist on the server as well in a view, right? And somebody's gone out and done the inventory. They've put different values in each of these, okay? And I've calculated a total, which I wouldn't bother to export, because if I did, I'd be sort of doing server work on my computer again. So if I take a value here, like a formula, and I export this, when this formula field hits SharePoint, SharePoint will just convert it to a number anyway. So there's no point in taking formula fields. If I want to do a formula in SharePoint, I should do it in SharePoint. But let's imagine that we've gone out, we've done our inventory, we have all of these numbers, and they're all set. Now what I want to do is I want to take these to SharePoint. It's a really simple matter if I have these in exactly the same order, okay, they're sorted by title or sorted by part number. It's a really simple matter for me to be able to go into my inventory, and sort it in the same order and just copy and paste right into the data sheet view of the grid. I want you to practice that once before you do it, because it really does it. It will replace values that are there already if you want. But if I had store 1, store 2, store 3, and I'd sorted each of these in ascending order, I'd be all primed to take this information here, copy it, turn around and go to SharePoint, and paste it into the columns that would be here as a way of updating this.
Cool.
Okay? That's why this data sheets view is useful. So if I just did store 1, let's just see if I can get away with just store 1, okay? I'm going to take those values and copy them, and I'm going to swing back over here to, there they are, just like that. Make sure they're sorted in the same order first. This is a great time to sort on some unique value like part number before you do this. But there they are. That's all the harder it is to take stuff, to update this like this. This is really powerful. You really want to make sure that you're being careful when you do this, because if there were values in there, they're gone now. When you switch to data sheet view, you make SharePoint a lot like Excel. And Excel takes your word for whatever it is that you do.